I live in Silver Ridge. He got so mad at me with this hat. He came in.
Is that a development? Yeah.
Easton, above Easton.
And you call her?
Now above Easton.
Or you drive you back over?
I'm going to service. That's why I want to go early.
So they'll go.
I get stuck. Hello.
Yeah.
Show up
So that's what they do.
just in time and leave.
So you have to, schedule. Yeah.
Show up later than sometimes.
Yeah, that's good.
What did you say? I didn't hear you.
Oh, you look scared. I told
I was answering a question.
I talked to her.
My mother was attacked to see the first thing on her mouth.
I brought too much out.
It's not because you smell it. We'll wake up in the morning, go down and bed under
Yes. A copy of that.
That don't happen too much.
That's how she
Well, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good to see you all today. Good to be seen, as they say. We have, guess what today's lesson's on? Can anybody guess?
Daniel and the lions.
How did you figure that out?
You said it last week.
I said it last week too, right? This is the picture that's in a children's Bible. And when my mother passed away in 1979, I came in 77, 2 years after I came, she passed away with cancer. And people gave money instead of just going for other things and went to buy Bibles for children. And so it's the Bible, not a children's Bible with, the stories cut down. It's the actual Bible, but it has some pictures for kids in the Bible. And this was always my favorite picture in that Bible. It just represented to me the calmness and the peace that God gives you when you follow Him and He does supernatural things for you. And I could just picture Daniel having a good night there with the kitty cats and taking it easy. And the picture, in order to get it on the screen this way, it goes longer and there's some little baby cubs and stuff in the picture. It's a pretty cute picture. One of my favorites, Daniel and the Lion's Den. Let's go to Daniel chapter 6 today. Sam, you'll have the first 9 when we're ready to start, all right? Hold on a second. Let's open in prayer. Father, I thank you that we have this time today to look at this wonderful episode of Daniel and his faith in you, God, and you're honoring him for following you and honoring yourself before a polytheistic society to show that you alone are God. And I thank you for that. And help us today. May our faith in you grow where we can take such steps of faith as we see Daniel doing. And I thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, well, we're going to divide this into 4 sections, verses 1 to 9 to start with. And so, Sam, how about you read it for us and we'll get the background. Then we'll go back and look at some things.
Daniel in the Den of Lions. It pleased Darius to appoint 120 satraps to rule throughout the kingdom, with 3 administrators over them, one of whom was Daniel. The satraps were made accountable to them so that the king might not suffer loss. Now Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. At this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him, because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Finally, these men said, "We will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel, unless it has something to do with the law of his God." So these administrators and satraps went as a group to the king and said, "May King Darius live forever." The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or human being during the next 30 days, except to you, your majesty, shall be thrown in the lion's den. Now, your majesty, issue the decree and put it in writing so that it cannot be altered, in accordance with the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be repealed. So King Darius put the decree in writing.
Okay, very good. Let's go back and look at this. In the beginning, in very first verse 1, Darius is brought into now. We learned about Darius last week at the very last verse. In verse 30 of chapter 5, that very night Belshazzar, the king of Babylonians, was slain, and Darius the Mede took over the kingdom at the age of 62. There's nothing ever simple about Daniel when it comes to the kings and what time they reigned and the order they reigned in. As we saw with Belshazzar, Belshazzar wasn't the official king. His father was the official king, but his father had to leave the area. No one, it's not recorded why he had to leave, but he left the area and he went to an area in Saudi Arabia and he stayed the rest of his life there. In the meantime, his next son in line, which was Belshazzar, took over for him, was in this context called king, but in the annals of the history there, he wasn't ever officially the king. He was second in charge next to his dad, who was in exile. That's a little confusing at times. And then the next confusing one is Darius, because Darius from the Medes and the Persians is also seen here. Who's the next king?
Cyrus?
Is it who?
Cyrus?
Cyrus? Cyrus is the next one, right? Darius. I'm getting, my mind is one of those, my cobwebs are really foggy this morning. I hope you'll excuse me here. Yours too? Yes, Cyrus. I couldn't remember because I'm thinking S and it's a C. Cyrus. Cyrus was the very next king after Belshazzar died when this happened. But he put officials in various parts of his kingdom because the kingdom of the Medes and the Persians was so large and expansive that he could not rule over all of it and visit all of it and be there. So he had others, and Darius was one of those that was in charge of the area of modern day Iraq and Iran, which is a lot of territory, especially in those days with just camel transportation. So Darius is called king. He's the king of the area, but he's not the official king. Cyrus is actually the official king of the Medes and the Persians. So if you're ever on Jeopardy, you'll get that right. Okay? Very good. All that was to tell you that. And now a satrap or satraps is, these are governors, would be equivalent to our governors of today that would rule under the president. And these are governors of an area. And there were 120 of them that ruled in the kingdom. Like there was 120 areas that would be like counties that ruled in the kingdom, with 3 administrators over them, and one of the 3 administrators was Daniel. He had worked his way up that high and that far, and he was one of the administrators. And so the satraps that were accountable to them, so the king might not suffer loss. So their responsibility was to be sure they were working well, the people, the monies, and everything was going good. And Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities. And his exceptional qualities, the first one is his honesty. It was not common in those days for rulers to be honest, especially if you were given authority over a group of people, over a providence. You always had your hand in the till a little bit there. You always, you counted out stuff for the king, 2 for him, 1 for you, kind of a thing. So Daniel was distinguished by his honesty and his integrity in the job. It's interesting because this is now his 3rd administrator, ruler, that he has been in their administration. And he's a foreigner. He's from Judea and was looked down upon by most of the others. He had no other friends in authority there with him. We don't know where Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are at this time. They're not mentioned anymore. We don't know if they're dead or if they're got moved to other parts of the country. Nothing is mentioned. So I said that so that, Darlene, when you ask me later, I would be able to let you know ahead of time. It doesn't say in the Bible what happened to them.
That's exactly right.
I knew you. I had you down, girl. I had you down. I knew you were going to ask that
I was
question.
just gonna raise my hand and answer.
Well, yeah, I'm a mind reader. So, he's exceptional qualities. But they couldn't find any corruption in him. It was easy to find corruption in most other rulers because, like I said, they always had their hand in the till. They were always taking some, and they were always given favors for favors and things like that. Sort of like today, right? And so they couldn't find any corruption against him. He was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. So he did his job well. And that's a great reputation to have amongst all people when you work, is to have that kind of a reputation, to be trustworthy, not corrupt, and not to be negligent, but to distinguish yourself in your workplace. So they said, we'll never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God. So what do they realize also was true about him, not only for the government side, but also for his religious side? What did they realize about him?
That he was loyal.
He was loyal and true to his God. He followed the laws of his God. And that he would not bow down to anything when it came to whether he followed the laws of God or not. So they figured, we got to trap him by something to do with his relationship to God. Verse 6, the administrators and the satraps went as a group to the king, and they said, may King Darius live forever. The royal administrators, which is not true, because Daniel wasn't included in that decision. The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or human being during the next 30 days, except to you, your majesty, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Darius was quick to agree. Why? Pride. Because they really buttered him up there. They really made him sound good. And it sounded really great to him. Oh, they're honoring me. My co-workers love me so much. They want me to be in this position. And they want me to issue this decree. And so for the next 30 days, everybody can only pray to me and not to any other god or any other human being. And notice the level that they put their gods on when he talked about to pray. He says to pray to any god or human being. Because in polytheism, the God that you have is not much greater than a nice person next to you. Because you have so many gods, and you include them all in so much stuff, that none of them are perfect, and none of them can do it all. That's why you have to have more gods than one. And so there's not much difference between the wooden idol that you have made into a god and another person. They all seem to be the same. Do I need to separate those two, Nancy? Okay. Nick, you go to that corner. Liz, you come over to this corner. Okay. Now, so he was trapped by pride that they're going to pray to me. They see me as a god. And that just made him lose his senses. Now, Your Majesty issued a decree and put it in writing so that it cannot be altered. He didn't even sniff this out at that point because his pride had blinded him so that he didn't see he was being led by the nose like a sheep to the slaughter is dumb. He's being led by the nose into this trap. So put it in writing, because once it's in writing and the king has signed it, it now becomes the law of the Medes and the Persians. It's an official document that cannot be broken. You made it in time still to read this, and very good. It cannot be altered in accordance with the law of the Medes and the Persians. That cannot be repealed. Not only can it be altered, can't be changed, it can't be repealed. You can't say, oh, this was a mistake, I shouldn't have made this law. And you can't say, well, we're going to change it a little bit, we're going to tweak it some. You can't do that. Once it was in writing by the Medes and the Persians, for the next 30 days, it has to stay in effect. Now, I don't know how long they waited before they caught Daniel. It seems to indicate it happened immediately, but when it happened, because it says in verse 10, which Sandy's going to read for us, chapter 6, verses 10 through 18. Okay, Sandy?
Okay.
But before she starts, it says when Daniel learned. So we don't know when he learned of this. He may have learned of it right away. He may have learned of it later. It's not said. So we'll let that go. Okay, darling?
Yep.
Okay. You're a funny girl. You're funny. Okay, Nancy, let's do 10 through 18.
Now when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. So they went to the king and spoke to him about his royal decree. Did you not publish a decree that during the next 30 days anyone who prays to any god or human being except to you, your majesty, would be thrown into the lion's den? The king answered, the decree stands in accordance with the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be repealed.
Now I see where Lisa gets it from. Go ahead.
Okay. Then they said to the king, Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah? Nope, I'm reading in the wrong.
That's okay.
Yeah, you are. Who is one of the exiles from Judah pays no attention to you, your majesty, or to the decree you put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day. When the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sundown to save him. Then the men went as a group to King Darius and said to him, remember, your majesty, that according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, no decree or edict that the king issues can be changed. So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, may your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you.
Keep going down to 18.
And a stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den. And the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the rings of his nobles, so that Daniel's situation might not be changed. Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night without eating and without any entertainment being brought to him. He could not sleep.
Okay, let's pick up our story, go back up to the top in verse 10 here. I was going to bring over my hat, no fear, but I left it home instead. Now when King Darius learned the decree had been published, he went home to his, when Daniel learned the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room. Now we don't know how long this was. So at some point he went home to his upstairs room, where the window open towards Jerusalem. Let me show you why he had the window open towards Jerusalem. Go to 1 Kings 8. Back in the scriptures to 1 Kings 8. Before you get to the book of Psalms and Nehemiah, Chronicles is a big one, and Kings is just before Chronicles. 1 Kings 8. This is Solomon's prayer of dedication to the temple. And we're going to look at verses 35 and 36. This is part of his prayer that he made in the dedication of the temple that Solomon was able to build for the Lord in Jerusalem. He says, when the heavens are shut up and there is no rain because your people have sinned against you, and when they pray toward this place and give praise to your name and turn from their sin because you have afflicted them, then hear from heaven and forgive the sins of your servant, your people Israel. Teach them the right way to live and send rain on the land and you gave your people and as an inheritance, for inheritance. What did he say when there was famine and drought because of their sins? That when this happened, people were to pray. What were they supposed to do when they prayed toward this place? So wherever they were, and it's sort of like what Muslims do today when they pray to Mecca. They bow down towards wherever Mecca is, anywhere in the world, whatever direction they need to bow down to, that's where they bow down, because the prayers get heard if they pray to Mecca, through Mecca. And so the Israelites were taught also that if you're in another area because of your sin or something's happened, you are to bow down towards Jerusalem. So that's why Daniel did that. He prayed towards Jerusalem, and he did so 3 times a day. And 3 times a day he got down on his knees and he prayed, and giving thanks to God just as he'd done before. So was he concerned if anybody saw him do this? No. Did he do it purpose for people to see him do it?
Yes.
No.
I don't think so.
No?
I don't think so. I don't
Why
think
did
he
he
was,
open the windows then so people could see?
so he could see.
So he could see.
Yeah. I don't think he was full of pride. He wasn't a
No, I
kind of
didn't-
prideful person. He wasn't somebody trying to say, look at me, look what I'm doing.
No.
I think he did it because that was his routine, to look towards Jerusalem and to be praying. If people saw him, that was insignificant. He didn't do it for the purpose of being seen. He did it for the purpose of fulfilling what God had said to do, pray towards Jerusalem. And he did it 3 times a day. Was it required to do it 3 times a day? In the scripture, did they require him to do it 3 times a day? No. He just chose to do that himself. That this is what he wanted to do 3 times a day. Now, I always couple these things together. No fear, got faith. Because when you have faith and you're doing what God has given you to do, you don't have to fear. You don't have to fear what others say. Now, that doesn't mean, remember his 3 buddies, when they went and bowed down to the image that Nebuchadnezzar had made, they didn't have fear either, but they understood something, that God would rescue them 1 or 2 ways. What are the 1 or 2 ways he would rescue them? Either send an angel and rescue them, or kill them and take them to heaven. Either way, they're rescued, and either way, they're not going to bow down and do what God told them not to do. They had great faith in the Lord and what he told them to do, and in this situation, Daniel as well. And because of that, he's not worried about the consequences. And that is something really good to try to grasp and understand. When you do what God has given you to do, you don't have to worry about the consequences. Bad consequences may come, but that's all part of God's plan. I said to our kids the whole time they were growing up, I said, you may go anywhere that you believe God has led you to go and has called you to go. Just be sure he led you. And if you're sure he is leading you to do that, then you go. It doesn't matter how dangerous the country is. It doesn't matter how far away it is. It doesn't matter what the problems are. You do what God has given you to do. Fear faith destroys fear, and fear destroys faith. And so the way to overcome fear is to not give in to it, to not just worry about this life now, but to recognize eternal life. And that's something that we need to understand. There are times that God tells you to do a certain thing. You just got to do it. And you can't worry about it. And you cannot let that be something that drags you down. You just need to do it. So he prayed 3 times a day, as he always did. And these men as a group found Daniel praying, asking God for help. So they had everybody there was a witness that he broke the rule. He broke the law that was given, that he put up. So they go running like little tattletales. They go running to the king and spoke to him about his royal decree. And the king has caught on at this point, because they say, did you not publish a decree that during the next 30 days, anyone who prays to any god or human being except to you, your majesty, that's their flattery, which was empty, would be thrown into the lion's den? The king answered, the decree stands, in accordance with the laws of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be repealed. Then they said to the king, well, Daniel, if you forgot, as one of the exiles from Judah, he pays no attention to you, your majesty. This your majesty stuff is kind of sickening. Or to the decree you put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day. When they say he still prays 3 times a day, what are they acknowledging?
His faithfulness.
His faith. He does this all the time. They knew he did that. That's why they suggested that decree. And the king was blindsided by what they did. He still prays 3 times a day. When the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. Now there's a big difference between when Darius hears what happens to Daniel from what Nebuchadnezzar does when he hears what Ananiah, Mishael, and Azariah did when they failed to bow down to the image. What was Nebuchadnezzar's response?
Into the furnace.
Toast them.
Throw 'em in.
He got angry. Well, he didn't throw him in yet. He got angry, though, at them for what they did, and he gave them a second chance to change their mind. But they wouldn't, and because they wouldn't, his anger got even greater, so much so that he ordered the furnace to be heated 7 times hotter than normal.
He also recognized that Daniel's God was greater than.
That's coming up. Hold on to it. Hold on to it. We're going to get there. You read ahead, didn't you? No. Yeah, I know. You read ahead. You cheated.
No.
I'm just teasing you, darling. I'm glad you knew that. That's a very good point to know. And so he's being trapped, and his response is not that he's angry at Daniel, because his response is he's angry at these guys that did this to him. He likes Daniel. Daniel was one of the 3 top ones. He likes Daniel a lot. And so when the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel. And he made every effort until sundown to save him. He was determined to rescue him. But why couldn't he rescue him? Because the law of the Medes and Persians could not be repealed, changed, or canceled. It was written and it had to stay. And so there's nothing he can do to rescue him. And he knows that. And he knows the reason that Daniel's going to be thrown into the lion's den is his fault. Because in his pride, he didn't think through what the request was. He just took what they said, was led like a sheep to the slaughter is dumb. He was led down this road, and he took it, and that was it.
Did he, have a relationship with Daniel? Like, how would he not?
Well, we'd have to read between the lines, Paul. But it looks like he liked Daniel a lot. He was obviously had to work together because he's one of the top 3 guys in the whole empire.
Right.
So they had to work together, and he liked him a lot.
So he
So,
probably didn't know the extent of Daniel's belief at that time.
oh no, he knew. Yeah, we're going to see. He's going to show that he knows that Daniel's a strong believer and in Yahweh, in the God of Yahweh. Look at what happens here. So then in verse 15, the men went as a group to the king. Remember your majesty, according to the law of the Medes and the Persians. He didn't want to see them show up. No edict or decree that the king issues can be changed. So they have forced the king's hand. So the king gave the order, because he had to, and they brought Daniel, and they threw him into the lion's den. Now this would be the picture's kind of good because it shows a beam of light coming from the top. It was underneath, and the entrance to the den was from the top. The keeper of the lions, to feed them, would open up the top, throw the meat down, and close the top. And the top may have just been made with bars, but anyway, you didn't go into the den. You just threw it in. Well, they put him into the lion's den. Now, I don't know if they lowered him down with a rope because he's later brought up, or if they threw him. I don't know. But it just says he was put into the lion's den.
It says through.
They threw him into the lion's den. But you could still be tied to a rope. The king said to Daniel, and here's where we see,
He knows.
Darlene, may your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you. Now, this is an admission that Darius can't rescue him. See, Darius is saying, I'm not a God like your God. Your God is the God, and may he rescue you. A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, that's so nobody could sneakily get him out. And the king sealed it with his own signet ring and the ring of the nobles. So not only was his ring's symbol on the wax that sealed the stone, but the guys that were accusing him, they had theirs there too, so that they could tell that the king didn't do anything wrong, that he didn't rescue Daniel without their knowledge. So they wanted to be sure he didn't touch it. They're really sealing their own fate here. In verse 18, the king returned to his palace, and he spent the night, and he did not have a good night. He lost his appetite. He didn't have any entertainment brought to him, and he couldn't sleep. And all these things happened to Darius because he was worried about Daniel. He really wanted to see Daniel rescued from the mouth of the lions. So let's pick it up now with verse 19. This is the next section, 19 to 24. Dave, you up there?
Yes.
You got it?
A voice from above.
The Lord, why don't you read for us? From on high.
Starting at 19 to 24.
You're awful confused for being the voice of God, but that's okay.
At the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions? Daniel answered, May the king live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions.
That's pretty good, Daniel.
They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight. Nor have I ever done any wrong before you, your majesty. That's what it would sound like.
Yeah, we got that. That's good.
I'm sure. The king was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. And when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. At the king's command, the men who had falsely accused Daniel were brought in and thrown into the lion's den, along with their wives and children. And before they reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones.
Very good.
Then King
No,
Darius.
you're good.
Okay.
Just 24. The Lord forgot that, just the 24. Okay. Verse 16. So the king gave the order, and he brought Daniel, excuse me, I jumped ahead here.
19.
19, thank you. At the first light of dawn, do you think he was anxious? Now, what does this intimate to you at this point? What could the king do?
Could bring him back out, right?
Could bring him back out. It wasn't an execution. It wasn't a sentence of execution, though
Death.
it was expected that you would die. It was what they called in those days, and these countries had these things, it was called an ordeal. An ordeal. Now, an ordeal, we had something similar to it for a while when lynching was capital punishment, was hanging. And if you survived being hung, like the rope broke or they didn't measure it right and your feet hit the floor and you got set free. An ordeal, there's another one in the scriptures back in Numbers, and I looked it up, I think it's Numbers 5. Do you remember the ordeal of how to test for an unfaithful wife?
Yeah,
What was it, Scott?
you drank the water with dust or dirt in it or something?
Well, you're good. You've been reading your scriptures. I like that. Yeah, the priest, you took the way. If you suspected your wife had been unfaithful, and she's with child, and you took her before the priest, and you made an offering, and the priest would take some dust from the floor, mix it with the holy water, and then this was the water of bitterness, and she was to drink it. And when she drank it, if later she got sick and aborted the baby because of her sickness, then she was guilty and treated accordingly. If she didn't get sick and she gave birth fine, then she was innocent and was allowed to then go on normally. And that was the closest thing to one of these ordeals that we have in Scripture that was for the Israelites at the time. And that was under the Levitical law in Numbers chapter 5. Didn't have anything for a husband to take, any water for him to drink. But so this was an ordeal because what happened is he was thrown into the lion's den, but if after being in the lion's den all night he survived, then he would be set free. How likely would it be that he would survive? Not likely at all. So at the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he doesn't even arrive yet. He just gets near the den. He calls to Daniel in an anguished voice. I mean, you can't make this any plainer. The king wants Daniel to live. He likes the guy, he trusts the guy, and he's praying that the God of Daniel has been powerful, more powerful than he, and more powerful than the lions. And he says, anguished voice, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, notice the emphasis there, all the admiration, been able to rescue from the lions. There's our picture. Daniel answered as he pets the lion. May the king live forever. May the king live forever. My God sent his angel to shut the mouths of the lions. This is equivalent to the fourth man walking around in the furnace of Nebuchadnezzar. Sent his angel to shut the mouth of the lions. They've not hurt me because I was found innocent in God's sight. Nor have I ever done anything wrong before your majesty. And so the Lord honored him, and he did the impossible for him and the unlikely for him. And one of the things I've said for many years, I've always thought of this my own self in my own life. You never get the privilege of sleeping with the lions until you first resolve not to eat the king's food. Daniel's first step was not here, was not bowing down and being caught. His first step was when he was captured and went to Babylonia and was with all the other Israelite boys that were captured too, and there were many of them brought to the palace, remember? What happened to all those guys?
They ate the food.
Yeah, they,
Yeah, but what happened to them?
They'd
We don't know. They're never talked about again. They're done.
What did that?
No, I don't think they were put to death. It's insignificant because they became like Babylonians. And they lost their Jewishness. They became like Babylonians. Whereas Daniel and his three friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, they committed that we're not going to eat this food, we're going to eat the kosher food, like we're supposed to eat. And they came up with a plan to enable the palace guard, to enable them to do this and not put him in a bad spot, a bad place. So he tested them for 2 weeks, and after 2 weeks they were found great, and then after the whole period, 3 years of the learning, they were found wiser than anybody else. God honored what they did. God always honors your faith in him and trust in him. He always honors that. And that's the lesson that Daniel learned early in captivity. And then as he goes through time, he keeps getting reinforced by God. You follow me, I will honor you. You follow me, I will lift you up. You follow me, I will do this for you. I will do this for you. And that's the confidence that builds his faith, so much so that when he got tossed into that den, I'm sure he had no doubt. I'm getting out of here. I'll see you tomorrow. I'll bring my pajamas. I'll see you tomorrow. Because he knew that God was going to rescue him. Why would he know that? Because he's already rescued me many times. He's not going to change. He's going to do it for me.
But there's no reason to be rescued because he had no fear.
Yeah, he would have, if he had died, he would have,
He
but
had no fear.
you know, it's like, I have found many, many Christians, me included, that don't fear death. But sometimes we fear how we
how
die.
we die, oh yes.
The act of dying.
Oh yes, it's not.
That getting eaten by lions, ripped apart by lions, I'm not so sure I want to go through that. But I understand what you're saying, but he just knows that the Lord's going to deliver him. He knows God's going to deliver him. And that's what I like what this artist has painted this picture with such contentment on Daniel and resolve on Daniel's face there. He's not a person that's afraid. He's sitting there, and the lions have their paws on him and tail wrapped around him, and he's just sitting there. You know, Darius is talking to him. Hey, I'm down here with the cats. You know, they bring him up. Now you know that it was a miracle by God, because as soon as the men and their wives and their children. Why the wives and their children? Well, in those days, if you did something wrong, they took care of your whole family. They destroyed your whole family, so there could never be revenge. But the family couldn't take revenge. So they wiped you out. Those lions were so hungry and so by nature seeing this as a food source,
Yes.
that before their bodies even hit the floor, they were ripped in pieces. So Pam's having a hard time. Pardon me? So it shows you that it wasn't that the lions weren't hungry. Whether they were hungry or not, they wouldn't treat you that way. This was God controlling the nature of the beast. So Daniel answers in verse 21. May the king live forever. May my God send his angel and will shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done any wrong before you, your majesty. The king was overjoyed. He's ready to eat and for some entertainment. The king was overjoyed, and he gave orders to let Daniel out of the den, And when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him because he had trusted in his God. I'm going to finish this up for us. At the king's command, the men who had falsely accused Daniel were brought in, thrown into the lion's den, along with their wives and their children. And before they reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones.
But
Then
why was
King
it, sorry.
Then King Darius wrote to all the nations and peoples of every language in all the earth. So now he's going to make this proclamation. And this is going to go far and wide. May you prosper greatly. I issue a decree that every part of my kingdom people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel. For he is the living God and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. He's rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. So Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius, the reign of Cyrus, and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. Now this doesn't mean that Darius became a Christian. Everybody is quick to try to make these guys Christians all the time, or believers, like Nebuchadnezzar. No, they were polytheists. They believed in many gods, and to add a god or to make one more superior than others was never a problem to them. But they wanted to acknowledge that Daniel, who was a monotheist, he had just one God that he worshipped, and that was Yahweh. So, you never get to sleep with the lions until you first resolve not to eat the king's food. May you someday get to sleep with the lions. Thank you for your attention. We're all dismissed. We'll get some coffee and